Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Jenna Stanton. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Craft Council. And thank you for meeting with us tonight for this special Monday meetup with Dr. Jennifer Salahub about Adolf Loos's impassioned essay from the early 20th century, Ornament and Crime. First off, I would like to begin by acknowledging that Alberta is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. Those of us joining from Alberta are on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6, 7, and 8 territories, and all of us are beneficiaries of these peace and friendship treaties. The Alberta Craft Council is dedicated to ensuring that the spirit of these treaties is honored and respected, and we hope that as individuals you join us in committing to learning, listening, reflecting, and taking actionable steps in truth and reconciliation, and by celebrating and supporting the creativity of Indigenous craftspeople. And with that, we are very excited for this evening's lecture with Jennifer Salahub. She's always entertaining and witty. And these Monday meetups that we have Jennifer presenting us with an art history or craft history lecture, like the one we had for Kitsch, have been our most popular Monday meetups that we've had since we've started them during COVID. So I think the only thing people don't like about art history class is the tests, because we definitely get a huge audience. We won't quiz you after, but anyhow, really looking forward to having Jennifer tonight. And I'm going to introduce our exhibition coordinator, Jill Allen, just to give a formal introduction of Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have so many of you out there. I just want to tell you a little bit about our speaker tonight. Dr. Jennifer Salahub is a Professor Emerita of Art and Craft Histories at Alberta University of Arts. Her BFA and MFA in Canadian art history were awarded by Concordia University, Montreal, and she received a PhD in the history of design from the Royal College of Art in London. Before moving to Calgary, she taught art history at Concordia University, University of Ottawa, and Montreal's Marion College. She is active in a number of professional societies, lectures and publishes internationally, is on the board of the Alberta Craft Council, and is on the editorial board of Ornamentum, the magazine for the Canadian Society of Decorative Arts. Jennifer was a recipient of the Tom McFall Honor Award in 2018. She has served on the board since 2010. Jennifer was introduced to Adolf Loos' essay, Ornament and Crime, as an undergraduate, and it was the first time that she felt that she might be a rebel, possibly criminal, because she adores pattern, decoration, and ornament. Jennifer, thank you so much for agreeing to give this presentation tonight and for all your hard work preparing. And please take it away. We're ready for you now.
Thank you so very, very much. Okay. And the good news is Anna has control of my screen. So all of my slides are in her hands. All right. Oh, good grief. Hold on. Which was very nice. There we go. All right. I'm happy again. Okay. Thank you for inviting me. I am thrilled to be here. I am really pleased we're doing this online because I don't think any one of us would want to go out tonight. All right. So Ornament and Crime. My next slide. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you these quotes, and all of the quotes that I'm giving you are from Ornament and Crime. And the first one is on tattoos. The modern man who tattoos himself is either a criminal or a degenerate. There are prisons in which 80% of the inmates show tattoos. The tattooed who are not in prison are latent criminals or degenerate aristocrats. If someone who is tattooed dies at liberty, it means he has died a few years before committing murder. Where to start? Where to start? So many goodies. I hope that you have read Ornament and Crime, and between laughing hysterically and spluttering indignantly, have come to understand not only why you got that tattoo, but are beginning to appreciate why Loos' century-old polemic about architectural complexity continues to inspire academic and artistic debates about the controversial role that ornament has played over the last century. For despite the florid rhetoric, many of the concerns raised by Loos regarding architecture and design continue to plague craft even today. I have been asked to introduce you to what I consider to be not only an extraordinary example of an extended rant, but a seminal reading in the historiography of art, craft, and design. The ACC's goal to inspire in you a considered, creative, and crafty response to Loos's thesis. And believe me, there are quotes in here that you can use, or statements that will inspire, or not. Okay, given the charged nature of ornament and crime, we expect to see some highly ornamented, cleverly ornamented, or starkly unornamented work being submitted. Furthermore, such is our faith in your ability to give umbrage form, the exhibition will, in turn, be the inspiration for a future Craft Council initiative, a mural to ornament the Edmonton building. Jenna or Jill will talk about that later. Unless otherwise stated, all the quotes are from the article. So, the evolution of culture is synonymous with the removal of ornament from useful objects. This is all Loos. I believe that with this discovery, I was bringing joy to the world. It has not thanked me. People were sad and hung their heads. What depressed them was the realization that they could produce no new ornaments. In this, his most famous essay, Loos maintains that ornamentation is a form of deceit. He argues that decoration is a waste of labor, materials, and capital, that it is an economic burden affecting health, budget, and evolution, in short, a crime against humanity. So tonight, in an attempt to channel Loos, you, as makers of craft, should be asking yourself a number of questions. What is ornament? What is the relationship between ornament and crime? Is ornament dangerous? Should it be reined in or even expunged? Should ornament be celebrated, free to run rampant? And most importantly, what would Loos have to say about you? Are you perhaps a straggler? The stragglers slow down the cultural evolution of nations and of mankind. Not only is ornament produced by criminals, but also a crime is committed through the fact that ornament inflicts serious injury on people's health, national budget, and hence on cultural evolution. And lest you think this is an argument with no currency, it has lately been reasoned that in our high-tech digital world, where anything is possible, the student of art, craft, and design must be reminded that just because you are able to do something, should you? Just because you can make ornament, should you? Here's a couple of quotations. Freedom from ornament is a sign of spiritual strength. The urge to ornament oneself and everything within reach is the ancestor of pictorial art. It is the baby talk of painting. Ornament is wasted labor power and hence wasted health. It has always been so. Now, I'll begin with a caveat. Though there are many elements of Loos's writing, and in this article in particular, that continue to entertain. In some cases, the language and the instances of bias and stereotyping make uncomfortable reading. But we are focusing on the article as a point of entry into a discussion about ornamentation. In no way am I suggesting that we condone contemporary racist tendencies, nor the ramifications of his appalling private life. That should send you on a couple of different courses. I will begin by quoting sections and selected passages from my translation of Ornament and Crime, found in Isabel Frank's anthology. Why I'm telling you this is that I want to warn you that there are innumerable translations of Loos's writing, with some rather intriguing and even extraordinary differences. For instance, in the translation I have been using, the clergy are referred to as the black alb, which is in fact a liturgical garment, while others describe them as hobgoblins. Obviously, there's a difference. So if you plan on responding to a specific passage in Ornament and Crime, acknowledge your source in your documentation and look around. You may find some real doozies. But now a quick overview of a few key terms. What do we mean by ornament? And what was happening at the time Loos was writing? The definitions. The first, simply ornament, a verb. You make something look more attractive by adding decorative items. Ornament, the noun, a thing used or serving to make something look more attractive, but usually having no practical purpose, especially a small object such as a figurine. This is when the hair on the back of your neck starts to rise. Embellishment, a noun, a decorative detail or feature added to something to make it more attractive. Decoration, the process or art of decorating something. Decorate, to make something look more attractive by adding extra items or images to it. Pattern, noun, a repeated decorative design. And then I thought I would just show you Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament. This was published in 1856. It's British, and it just lets you know that conversation about ornament was long-standing, ongoing, and Owen Jones provided examples from different eras and cultures, page by page, that designers could use. It was a resource for artists, for architects and designers, and today we have similar resources available to us to be able to be downloaded at will. Okay, so just this idea that it's an ongoing conversation. Now, Adof Loos, this is an overview of his life. A really quick overview before we start talking more about the article. He was born in Czechoslovakia when it was part of the Austrian Empire. He is an Austrian Czech architect and theorist. He studied in Europe. He was apparently a mediocre student. He studied at various technical institutes before he was called up for military service. And then he went back and studied art and craft institutions rather than an architectural school. And to my mind, that may make him a little bit more open or sympathetic to domestic interiors. Now, the most important thing that happened, I think, in his life is he visited the USA between 1893 and 1896. He lived in New York, he traveled to Philadelphia and to Chicago. He worked as a mason, a floor layer, and a dishwasher, but he also visited the 1893 World's Fair, where he would have, in Chicago, where he would have seen skyscrapers. And he was inspired by Louis Sullivan and form follows function that Louis Sullivan coined in 1896. Now, Sullivan wrote The Ornament in Architecture in 1892. That's 20 years before Ornament and Crime. And Sullivan, the American, writes, I take it as self-evident that a building quite devoid of ornament may convey a noble and dignified sentiment by virtue of mass and proportion. He proposed to, and I quote, refrain entirely from the use of ornament for a period of years and concentrate acutely upon the production of buildings well-formed and comely in the nude. One of Sullivan's concerns was the development of an architectural symbolism, like new styles, new designs, new ornamentation, consisting of simple, geometric, structural forms and organic ornamentation. This is his building, the Wainwright Building in St. Louis, Missouri. It is terracotta. It was one of the first structures to combine load-bearing materials and steel framework. In other words, skyscrapers, before they had the steel framework or the curtain walls, the brick walls at the base would be 20 feet thick and get narrower as they reach the top. They look all flat from the outside, but it's actually really holding it up. But what we're seeing here is the decorative elements, so the idea of modern, and this would have influenced Loos when he went back to Austria, sorry. Okay, Adolf Loos returned to Europe and established an architectural practice in Vienna in 1897. He was 27 years old. Right? Okay, the same year, the secessionists were formed. And in 1889, Thorsten Veblen's The Theory of the Leisure Class, all about conspicuous consumption, was published. That was a stratification, a critique of the social stratification through class and consumerism. Right, 1899, the Adolf Loos Museum Cafe was built, and I'm going to show you that. And Loos continued to contribute to critical rhetoric of modernism in architecture and craft through his writing and lectures throughout his life. Ornament and Crime was not written in 1908, which is the date that is given to it. It was about a decade in the making. It started off as numerous lectures and was only in 1913 published, more or less in the form we see it today, but it was published in Paris and it was published in French, right before it was published in German. Loos House is a house we will look at, or a building we will look at, 1911, 1912, and then the Mueller House in 1930. Now, Loos had been impressed by the efficiency of American architecture. What I'm showing you here is the Kunsthistoric Museum in Vienna. This is sort of typical of Viennese architecture. It was a copy of the Baroque. This is a Renaissance revival, but this is the exterior, this is the interior, this is what you would see when you went to Vienna. Loos had been impressed by the efficiency of the American architecture, and the new cities, the skyscrapers, highlighted how out of step in his mind with modern world the city of Vienna and the Austro-Hungarian Empire were. He noted that in the face of the historicism and eclecticism that was infecting architecture, it seemed that the early part of the 20th century had no style of its own and instead subsisted on borrowing from the past. All right, and that's what he did not want you to do. The enormous damage and devastation caused in aesthetic development by the revival of ornament would be easily made light of, for no one, not even the power of the state, can halt mankind's evolution. It can only be delayed. We can wait. But it is a crime against the national economy, this is ornament, that it should result in a waste of human labor, money, and material. Time cannot make good this change. We may wait, but we're going to sink as time goes on. Loos was operating in the turn of the century Vienna, a most vibrant place intellectually, socially, and artistically, and modern architecture in Vienna and modern architecture and design was exemplified by the Art Nouveau or Jugendstil and the Vienna Secession. Now, the Vienna Secession was a breakaway group of Austrian artists, graphic designers, and architects who challenged the Association of Austrian Artists for their support of traditional artistic styles. And the styles that they supported were, and I'm going to give you two examples. The first is Henry van der Velde, who is Belgian, and this is the interior of the Havana Tobacco Company, and this is Art Nouveau. All right, that curvature, we know Art Nouveau, all of the curls and the lines. The other building is by Otto Wagner, the Vienna Majolica building, and on the right-hand side, the Secession Vienna building. It's from 1899. Adolf Loos did not belong to the secession movement, which was Austrian, but his work was described as modern by his contemporaries. The fin de siècle, that bridge between the late 19th century and the early 20th century, was a period of transition, meaning that the critical reaction to modern architecture was ambiguous. And as Jeanette Willett suggests, vocabulary was lacking or still in a state of becoming. And certainly the architects themselves were caught in an in-between state when modern was attempting to break away from that which was historical. Now, I'm just gonna make a little aside here. This is a period when Alberta was being given form. It had become a province in 1905. It was concerned with modern identity. It was concerned with urban. That was sort of the goal, not rural. And Alberta sort of suffered for that very reason, because it was this notion that geographical isolation is equated with cultural isolation. And you'll see that Loos is very interested in the modern world, the urban world, and looking forward, not backwards. Loos faced a dilemma, in other words. How do you articulate a rational argument against the new superfluous ornament of the Secession and the Art Nouveau and the growing interest in neoclassicism and historicism? What was the new century going to look like? In his article, he writes, every stage had its style. Is our age alone to be refused a style? By style, people meant ornament. And then I said, or he said, weep not, see therein lies the greatness of our age, that it is incapable of producing new ornament. We have outgrown ornament. We have struggled to a state without ornament. Soon the streets of the cities will glisten like white walls. The fulfillment will come. From his comments, we know that Loos wasn't merely frustrated by what he regarded as his fellow Austrians' apparent lack of taste. Rather, he saw unnecessary ornamentation as a sign of moral weakness. Right? Now, this may in part explain, as Christopher Long argues, the contrast Loos attempted to draw between what he called modern primitives primitives, such as Van de Velde and Hoffman and Ulbrich, the artist that I just showed you, early 20th century in Vienna, whose work he viewed as contrived and lacking any connection to the new urban industrial reality, right? He saw them as very self-interested, narcissistic works of art. So he's looking at these modern primitives and comparing them with the Papuan, the example he used for the less westernized cultures. And this is where we start to worry about bias, whose ornamented world, although representing what he considered to be at a lower state of development. Now that's one thing, it's a lower state of development, but at the same time, he regarded it as both authentic and appropriate. Loos did not condemn all ornament, only that which was not culturally derived, perhaps foreshadowing our concern regarding cultural appropriation. And I think this is a really interesting argument that we could take out of Loos's paper today and argue what he was saying about appropriation. It is helpful to note that he was equally dismissive of his neighbors, who were, in his estimation, also at a lower state of cultural development. He said, "The speed of cultural evolution is reduced by stragglers, those who cannot live in the present. I am perhaps living in 1908, but my neighbor is living in 1900, and the man across the way in 1880. It is unfortunate for the state when the culture of its inhabitants is spread over such a large or great period of time. Happy is the land that has no such stragglers and marauders. Happy is America. Among ourselves, there are unmodern people, even in the cities, stragglers from the 18th century, horrified by a painting with violet shadows because they cannot understand why the artist used violet. Think Matisse for that. It often takes several readings of Ornament and Crime to realize that Loos was in effect employing rational thought to argue that the suppression of historic ornament was necessary if humankind was to evolve, to become modern. Modern was an identity he associated with urban, never rural, but also of restraint and practicality. Here is an example of his restraint in his design practice from 1931, and take note of his regard for utilitarian goods. Next slide. These are glasses he designed, and he writes, "The modern spirit demands above all that a product be practical. Beauty symbolizes the highest perfection, and since the impractical can never be perfect, neither can it ever be beautiful." Right? And that's really kind of a nice switch, because it's usually this idea, if it's utilitarian, it cannot be art. And he's going, but if it's impractical, it can never be perfect. It cannot be beautiful. This is another image of the same glassware that is still being made. And should you want to know US, it's $334 for the water glass and $220 for the liqueur. Loos stated, if all objects were to last as long in aesthetic terms as they did physically, the consumer could pay a price for them, which would enable the laborer to earn more money and work shorter hours, we wish. But look at these glasses. These glasses are almost 100 years old. These are not our glasses, your parents' glasses, your grandparents' glasses. Perhaps these were the glasses used by your great-grandparents. And yet, I think we would all like them. For Loos, it was not enough to simply reduce decoration. He chose to reject ornamentation absolutely. He considered the work of the secessionists as too pretty and too fashionable. In other words, built-in obsolescence. Changes in ornament lead to a permanent devaluation of the labor product. I'm quoting again. The workers' time and material employed are capital goods that are wasted. He wrote in a florid style that is somewhat alien to us today and continues, humanity is still to groan under the slavery of ornament. Man has progressed enough for ornament to no longer produce erotic sensations in him, and that is covered in the article. You can go off and find erotic by yourself. Man has progressed far enough to find pleasure in purchasing a plain cigarette case, even if it cost the same as one that was ornamented. Ornament generally increases the cost of an article. Nevertheless, it happens that an ornamented object whose raw materials cost the same and which demonstrably took 3 times as long to make is offered at half the price of a smooth ornament. Omission of ornament results in a reduction in the manufacturing time and an increase in wages. And what affected pocketbooks affected national economics. For Loos argues, Ornamented plates are very expensive, whereas the white crockery from which the modern man likes to eat is cheap. The one accumulates debts, the other savings. It is the same with whole nations. Woe when a people remains behind in cultural evolution. The British are growing wealthier and we poorer. Now, Loos remained adamant about the problematics of applying ornament, whether on buildings, bodies, or food. All right. Now, I took this slide when I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and I was in a coffee shop, a bakery, Gales, and I saw these and thought, oh my God, it illustrates my talk. All right. So notice he's using the word cultivated and modern interchangeably. And he says, I don't accept the objection that ornament heightens a cultivated person's joy. I don't accept the objection contained in the words, but ornament is beautiful. Ornament does not heighten my joy in life or in the joy in the life of any cultivated person. If I want to eat a piece of gingerbread, I choose one that is quite smooth and not a piece representing a heart or a baby or a rider, which is covered all over with ornaments. The man of the 15th century won't understand me, but all modern people will. I want to know how you're decorating the cookies this year. For modernists, architecture and design was meant to express the new industrialized society, a visual manifestation of anti-historicism and anti-tradition. As Loos said, look forward, not backward. But there were implications and there were consequences, criminal consequences. Modern ornament has no parents and no progeny, no past and no future. And I'm scooting down to the last part of this because I already repeated that first part of this quote. An ornament is no longer organically related to our culture. It is no longer the expression of our culture. The ornament that is produced today bears no relation to us or in any other human or the world at large. It has no potential for development. In 1899, it's only a couple of years after he's established his practice, Loos was commissioned to design the Museum Café in Vienna, the interior of a building that had been built in 1877 and is located next to the Kunsthistorisch Museum. So you know what the museum looks like. So this is the exterior and the interior of the cafe. In a handwritten paragraph found in an early draft of Ornament and Crime, Loos alludes to the timeless qualities of architecture that is devoid of ornamentation. He compares his own work to a candle factory that Joseph Hoffman had just finished designing, completed the same year. And he begins with a backhanded compliment. The interior of Hoffman's Apollo candle factory shop in Vienna, in soft and colorfully painted wood, which was executed 11 years ago, is not nearly as intolerable as Hoffman's work are today, or as they will appear to be in 11 years. The Cafe Museum, however, his museum, or cafe, designed according to my principles, will not become unusable until the glue no longer holds the furnishings together. All right. So you're looking at the interior of it as it was restored, as it was originally, with the light green walls. The only decorative element you may be able to see is the brass rails, but they functioned as electrical conductors. He used the pale green walls. He had the aggressive red colored chairs that he designed, made in the Tonnet factory, the bentwood factory. The critic Willem Scholerman reviewed the new cafe, and I'm going to read you a bit more of the review than's on here. He wrote, "A curious event is the talk of the town's closed circles. Vienna has a new coffee house. You mean Cafe Secession? No. We mean Cafe Museum. Well, maybe you should call it Cafe Secession, for what it is modern about it has nothing to do with the secession. They've seceded whatsoever. For the secession, tradition is nothing. For Adolf Loos, everything. Since the secession works with ornamentation, Loos would kill ornament. The secession would stamp the applied arts through the individuality of the creative artist. Loos proceeds from the individuality of the materials. The secession is decorative and strives to make the construction fit the decoration. For Loos, the construction is everything. I hope bells are ringing in some of your heads right now, thinking that's me. What have we profited from this coffee house? This is the continuation of the review. What does it teach us? It shows that simplicity and elegance spring from the same root, from clarity. It dispenses with everything which is dispensable. It not only shows how the useful is contained in the beautiful, but how the beautiful is contained in the useful. Now, I simply have a picture of Cafe Loos's chair that's for sale right now. It's approximately 1,600 Canadian. It's a copy. It's, and I had to go off and figure out where it was made. It's the United Arab Republic, and it is made out of a popular African hardwood, wenge. Throughout his life, but it's still being used and sold, is what I wanted you to see. Throughout his lifetime, more than 120 years later, throughout his lifetime, Loos made his views known through his writings and through public lectures, which took place in lecture halls or ad hoc in cafes. In 1910, he was asked to repeat a lecture he had given on Ornament and Crime, right, at the behest of the editor of the literary journal Der Sturm. The response was cordial and positive. In other words, he'd been giving this lecture for a while. People knew his views. Although the Berlin weekly satirical journal Ook, which translates as joke, ran a piece poking fun at Loos for his anti-ornament stance, portraying him as a slightly unhinged zealot who wanted to report to the authorities all of those criminals who dared to use floral wallpaper. Now, although the Calgary Herald makes no mention of Loos, the use of ornament was under discussion in Alberta. So the next slide. In misuse of ornament condemned, the misuse of ornament was condemned. The lecturer giving as a general rule that when a doubt existed as to the necessity or propriety of ornament in any particular part of a structure, it would be easier to omit it, right? Now, I've only thrown that in because seeing as we are in Alberta, it's rather interesting to know that they were following the conversation. And in fact, within 2 years, they will be citing Joseph Hoffman and the Vienna secessionists as an interesting fabric designer that uses textiles and to inspire contemporary and modern art using contemporary or primitive textiles is what they will call them. 20th century modernists would come to see Loos's writing as a purist call to arms, and his polemic continued to gain traction in the interwar years. It has been said that Ornament and Crime served as a manifesto for the emerging modernist design movement, which insisted on stripping design objects of ornamentation and supplanting the charms of decoration by the severe, purist pleasures of cubic geometry. Now, in 1910-1911, Adof Loos created Loos House. It was actually the Goldman and Salach building. It was nicknamed Loos House because of Loos's name, and was simple. It was completely at odds with all of its neighbors and the palace, which was across the street. It was simple. It was stark, described as like a woman with no eyebrows, as the windows lacked decorative details. For a while, window boxes were installed, but this did not address the problem. This building was secretive. Typically, the ornamental details of architecture, the grand entrances, the rooftop statues, the carved architrave announce what is happening inside. The gray marble pillars, the plain windows on the Loos House said nothing. In 1912, when the building was completed, it was a tailor shop. But there was no symbols or sculptures to suggest clothing or commerce. To observers on the street, the building could just as easily have been a bank. And indeed, it did become a bank. When in 1920, the Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier reprinted Ornament and Crime in L'Esprit, the journal of the Purist group, the New Spirit, it was mistitled, or was it mistitled, Ornament is Crime. Unadorned, geometric form was regarded as the new expressive language of modern design and architecture. The international style of architecture was also known as rationalist architecture and would remain the dominant style, architectural style, well into the 1970s. The vocabulary of modern design was in place. form follows function. A machine aesthetic, curtain walls, plate glass and steel, black, white, and gray. Minimalist, ornament and decoration stripped away. One might even argue that although ornament would survive in practice, it was to be shorn of aesthetic significance and of its independent artistic principles. We're now moving beyond the date of the article, and I want you to consider how you might walk the fine line that is the Janus face of ornament, what historian Brian Andrews calls its dichotomy. Ornament lends grace and beauty. Conversely, it has been defined as an embellishing note, not belonging to the essential harmony or melody. Herein lies the dichotomy of ornament, comprehended as a positive principle in one mean, but seen as a near superfluous in a divergent light. Right? So it's got this sort of two faces. Given both Freud and Loos were active in Vienna at the same time, I don't think it's a far stretch to suggest that Freud's idea of masking is in evidence in Loos's domestic structure. Freud spoke about how each person wears a mask. In other words, one cannot tell what the other person is thinking by looking at their faces. Loos manifested this idea in his houses. Loos's interiors were conceived as a place of retreat from the shocking alterations in the public realm. While Frank Lloyd Wright was perfecting the seamlessness of the transition from inside to outside, Loos was deliberately keeping the public outside and the private inside of his house as separate as possible. Mühle House in Prague was built in 1930. This is Loos's architecture. The stark, white, cubic facade exemplifies the arguments regarding ornament and reflect Loos's understanding of materials. The client, Herr Müller, co-owned a construction company specializing in reinforced concrete. This was a new and expensive construction technique, which embodied ideas of functionality and luxury. And just as a quick aside, in 1907, when Thomas Edison patented a concrete house, the house that they made was in the Italianate style. It just simply looked like a typical Italianate or Neo-Italianate house with the same coving, architrave, etc. It was a resplendent repurposing of cultural ornamentation. The interior of the house was different. As for decorating his interior spaces, he believed that as much furniture as possible should be built in, of top craftsmanship. He really wanted craftsmanship to be good, but of simple geometric lines. Functionality ruled. Loos admired, and this is not in the article, but he admired English gentleman's fashion. He actually published a journal on fashion and English fashions, just two issues. And the fabrics he used in his interior were of the English arts and crafts style, and somewhat surprisingly, chintz. The next interior of the shot of the house, the interior private spaces were lavishly decorated with marble, wood, and comfortable furniture. Loos was one of the few architects who felt that the client should have a say. He felt the client was going to bring in things that were comfortable to him. It is full of hand-woven Persian carpets. He actually collected Persian carpets, and rich, smooth surfaces are in evidence in contemporary photographs. Loos understood and used ornament throughout his architecture, but it was not the ornament of the Secessionists or the Art Nouveau. It was ornament based in history and in the materials themselves. In 1970, in an article entitled Hands Off, he wrote, "Nowadays, even the most vulgar person would hesitate to decorate a fine wood with inlay work or engrave over the natural patterns of a marble slab. Fine material is God's own wonder." He collected leather, plain, and he collected silver, plain. Leading up to the conclusion of Ornament and Crime, Loos warns his readers, the modern man who holds ornament sacred as a sign of artistic achievement of past epochs will immediately recognize the tortured, laboriously extracted, and pathological nature of modern ornament. Ornament can no longer be borne by someone who exists at our level of culture. It is different for people and nations who have not reached this level. He goes on to explain that his is a narrow audience. I am preaching to the aristocrat. I tolerate ornaments on my own body when they constitute the joy of my fellow men. Then they are my joy too. I can tolerate the ornaments made by the Kafir, the Persian, and the Slovak peasant, for they all have no other way of attaining the high points of their existence. We have art, which has taken the place of ornament. Sort of like art craft. His concluding statement, and I'm going to combine two translations, because just to give you a little bit of a taste. Freedom from ornament is a sign of spiritual strength. The other translation says it's a sign of intellectual power. Modern man uses the ornament of earlier or alien, the other says past or foreign, cultures as he sees fit. He concentrates his own inventiveness on other things. Okay. This is not quite the end of my talk, but I wanted you to see his gravestone. He designed it himself, simple block of stone with only his name, no dates, no ornamentation. He died of syphilis, deaf, and very ill. Now, when I was introduced, I'm going to my conclusion. When I was introduced, you were told that it was this article that made me first consider that I might be a closet rebel. I seem to have gone through my undergraduate studies always slightly out of step with contemporary expectations. In hindsight, I realized that my studio instructors had been trained by modernists, and as a result, despaired over my love of ornament and shuddered at my interest in craft. I learned to keep a low profile and would console them by saying that I planned to go into art history, that I was only taking studio classes so I could understand and write about the processes. Only when postmodernism began to challenge modernism's grand narrative through the use of craft media and the employment of aggressive ornament and irony did I begin to feel validated. Since then, my academic and personal life has been profoundly defined by ornament and decoration, and of course, craft. Nonetheless, it was only yesterday, honest to God, it was yesterday, rereading this paper that realization dawned, an actual hit one forehead moment. And I understood why I'm such a fan of ornament. The clue, Loos House, the building with no eyebrows. It was controversial because it was silent. I am a storyteller who takes pleasure in the stories of others. I read mysteries as they demand engagement in the unraveling of clues. And what I appreciate about ornament is that ornament always tells a story. Loos understood its power of communication and set out to gag ornament by alluding to its criminal overtones. And he said, not only is ornament produced by criminals, but also a crime is committed through the fact that ornament inflicts serious injury on people's health, national budget, and hence on cultural evolution. While we might smile at the rhetoric, could not one use this sentence as a point of entry into the ongoing craft conversation, arguing that today the reverse is true, that it is the stragglers, the craft makers, who, by purposefully slowing time down, are to be humankind's salvation. Think the slow food, the slow craft movements. Rather than perpetuating the dictum that time is money, which presumes that time spent on ornamentation is simply money lost, could we not argue that through the creation of ornament, stragglers are promoting the understanding that the value is the time expended? Don't you remember when your mother would tell you that grandma will like it more if you made it yourself? The time expended, it was the time that was going to be valued. I hope that this introduction to some of the underlying tensions in Ornament and Crime will inspire conversations about craft and labor, economics, environment, appropriation, cultural identity, the history of materials, and of course, tattoos. But what I really want is that you re-engage with ornament in your studio practice. What does ornament mean to you? How does it inform your work? Is its presence or absence assertive, passive, subtle, seductive? And as we want to see a powerful response to Ornament and Crime, I would like you to imagine what Adolf Loos would say if he saw your work. How would he use your work to illustrate his article, Ornament and Crime? Thanks.